is I, Cassandra, the vintage arcade gal. And I had just made a video, the last one I posted was a tour of all the arcade games in the collection. And I did it because in my mind, one of my big goals this year was that I was not going to buy any new arcade games. I was going to concentrate on a couple of the ones in the collection that needed some TLC and a couple of custom cabinet builds I had planned for the future. And of course, we made it all the way to March, and I have purchased another arcade game. And my justification for this was, of course, as you saw in the title, it is a Q Bert cocktail, which is pretty rare. They didn't make very many of the cocktail variant of this game, and the cocktail is pretty interesting in its own right for a lot of reasons that we'll get to in a moment. Originally, I had purchased a J-Rock multi-game board for Q Bert, thinking to myself that I was going to make either a custom build Q Bert cabinet that would play all these Gottlieb slash Milestar games in one cabinet, or I would do something with it. Didn't really have any plans for it, but I knew I wanted to build something. So when this cocktail came available, even though it was on the other side of the country and I had to have it shipped, which was pretty expensive since gas prices are so high right now, unfortunately, that I just couldn't resist. I had to get it. I've always been very interested in the cocktail variant of this game. It's very neat. There's not many that exist, and probably not many that are left. So before we get into my shame of my new acquisition, let's take a very brief look at the history of Gottlieb and Q Bert. Gottlieb is one of the oldest names in coin-op gaming, founded originally in Chicago in 1927. Gottlieb mostly made pinball machines up until the early 1980s, providing several innovations and famous pinball machine themes over the years. In 1976, the company was purchased by Columbia Pictures, a possible response to Warner Brothers buying an interest in at the time, an up-and-coming arcade game company called Atari. In the late 1970s, with the release of Tito's international hit Space Invaders, Gottlieb started to get into the hot US arcade video game market. The first two machines released by Gottlieb were somewhat forgettable shooters licensed from other companies. Those games were No Man's Land, licensed from Universal, and New York, New York, which was licensed from Sigma. Neither game was wildly successful in the marketplace. Despite this, though, Gottlieb invested in developing their own original titles, the first released being Reactor in 1982. Reactor was met with a lot of interest in the industry thanks to its designer Tim Skeely, but was not hugely successful. It would be the next in-house title that would send Gottlieb's video dreams into the stratosphere. Q Bert was designed by Warren Davis and Jeff Lee, inspired by the drawings of M.C. Escher and Mad Magazine artist Ed Roth. The game went through several gameplay design changes during the development phase. One of the more interesting changes was that originally Q Bert was supposed to have the ability to shoot from his nose. The game famously also includes Q Bert's fake cursing via a speech bubble graphic and speech sound effects when he gets killed. Some upright machines use the fake cursing quote instead of the game title on the top marquee. Q Bert also had some interesting hardware design choices, including a pinball-style knocker in the cabinet, which engages if a character falls off the pyramid maze. The joystick, known as the Rotterdam joystick, is a standard 4-way stick mounted slightly askew for the diagonal gameplay throughout the pyramid. Q Bert, like several other Gottlieb arcade game titles, uses a power supply PCB, sound PCB, and a separate main game PCB. The power supply and sound PCB in Q Bert have a well-deserved reputation for being difficult to keep running, thanks to some questionable design choices around voltage requirements. Luckily, modern collectors have designed some solutions to make the game a little bit more reliable. Released in the late fall of 1982, Q Bert became a smash hit, and thanks to the lead character's cute design, It became a popular item for licensing within the early 80s for all sorts of Q Bert toys or inexpensive merchandise. Q Bert had a segment on the popular Saturday morning cartoon Saturday Morning Super Kid in the USA from about 1983 through 1985 and was adapted for home versions of the game to just about every popular home video game system and computer of the era. Gottlieb would even go on to release a Q Bert themed pinball machine as well. The exact number of upright machines is unknown, and the popular estimate with collectors is that about 25,000 machines are made. Personally, I think this actually might be a little high. I think the actual number is around 20,000 to maybe 21,000 upright machines. Gottlieb might have been unable to make as many machines as they had desired, simply due to manufacturing limitations compared to other larger arcade game companies of the time. They simply couldn't make as many machines as were demanded by the marketplace when Q Bert was red hot. The quick turnaround of the game to home systems might have also slowed down demand for the arcade version by late 1983. Gottlieb would release several other arcade games in 1983 and 1984, some of them quite interesting, including the title Mad Planets and a video game based on the movie Crawl, but none of them would come even close to the success of Q Bert. Also of note here is in 1983 when the parent company Columbia Pictures was taken over by an even larger company, Coca-Cola. They changed the name of the company Gottlieb to Milestar Electronics to sound more high-tech possibly. 2 Q Bert sequels were developed. The unreleased, faster, harder, more challenging Q Bert, which was really intended to be kind of an upgrade kit for the game, and the 1983 released Q Bert's Cubes. Cubes was not as successful and was hindered by a deteriorating video game market condition at the time. Milestar would close in 1984 and would be reborn as a company called Premier Technology, returning to pinball manufacturing but producing one more arcade video game, the very rare 1989 title Exterminator. The Gottlieb name would eventually return to adorn new pinball machines, but unfortunately the company would finally closed for good in 1996, with their last pinball machine being based around the movie Barbed Wire, starring Pamela Anderson. Today, Q Bert is one of those arcade titles that is in a higher level of pop culture awareness. Q Bert shows up often in movies or films or TV shows when a classic gaming property is needed or showcased, and Q Bert is commonplace in modern classic gaming merchandise. Over the years, there have been several reboots of the game for modern gaming systems. The arcade game is highly sought after by arcade game collectors, and original machines in good condition can command decent money. The general design of the Q Bert cabinet was reused for other Gottlieb titles in 1983 and 1984, with some minor differences here or there. The cocktail variant of the cabinet is extremely rare, with most collectors estimating that only a few hundred machines were ever made. From my digging around, this seems pretty accurate. I feel no more than 400 and maybe as few as 250 cocktail cabinets were made for Q Bert. The cocktail versions have several differences compared to the upright machine and have a unique design that was not shared with any other title ever. All the cocktail cabinets were manufactured in mid-1983 towards late 1983 at the very tail end of Q Bert production.
Alright, so there is a very, very brief history on Gottlieb and Q Bert for you. If you are seeking more deeper dives on either one of those subjects, there's an awful lot of information online. There's even a book written by one of the creators of Q Bert about the history of developing the game as well, you may want to look into. But I wanted to show you, this is you don't see Q Bert very often in this configuration, the extraordinarily rare cocktail version. You're probably asking me, hey Cassandra, why did they make so few Q Bert cocktails? But the better question is actually, why did they make the Q Bert cocktail at all? Because this was manufactured late to mid 1983, well after the initial production of Q Bert uprights had ended. And it was probably for a couple of reasons. One, possibly because of suggestions or demands of distributors or operators who wanted a cocktail configuration cabinet, or they may have promised a cocktail version early in production, never delivered, and people got fussy, so they decided to make a couple of them just very, very quickly. There are a few interesting features and kind of quirks to the cocktail that don't show up in the upright version or any other Gottlieb arcade game. This is a unique cabinet to the Q Bert cocktail, and it wasn't utilized for any other game ever. This is only it. And they only made, like I said, a couple hundred of these, and who knows how many or how few still exist. I'm willing to bet not very many. So we can kind of start at the beginning here with the top glass, which is unique to the cocktail, and very, very artsy and fun and colorful, considering most other companies' cocktails are rather generic looking or kind of boring and really were designed to blend into the background of a restaurant or a bar. And this one really, really pops. In fact, I like the artwork on the cocktail more than I like the artwork on the upright. I think it just really looks sharp. Each side has its own little baby control panel with the joystick player 1, player 2 only on the first side. It's a rather small, cramped control panel, kind of in this little cubby. There's a speaker on both sides of the cabinet, so both players can hear equally. And we have the Gottlieb raised coin door variation that's pretty popular with collectors. It doesn't seem like all Q Berts had these raised door coin boxes, so I'm not really quite sure why. They probably didn't make these. They were probably made by another company. Probably either Hap or Wicco made these for them, so maybe they weren't always available. And the game is wood-grained sides, except for the one side that houses the electronics. It's just plain brown. So this beautiful top glass art does tend to suffer from a lot of paint flaking and paint cracking underneath the glass that it's painted on. The reverse here probably was a heat transfer of some kind, probably not a silk screen. And this flaking is almost every cocktail I've seen suffers from this, unfortunately. There's a repo available from this old game, so maybe eventually we'll get a repo. This is actually in nicer shape than most that I've seen. Some of them get pretty bad. So as we open the game up, we see under this huge heavy top piece of wood we have a very small 13-inch monitor and an awful lot of space on the right hand side that doesn't really house much other than the coin mix. And then underneath we have the power brick, and all the electronics are on the other panel, which also folds out. This is the original monitor for this game, and it has almost no burn-in, and it has a lot to do probably with the fact this game doesn't seem to seem like it had a lot of use. The coin meter is under 1,500 plays, which is just an unbelievably small amount for a game this popular. So either this game was purchased for home use or wherever it was located, it just never really saw a lot of success. So somebody kind of lost their shirts on it. So with the access panel down, you can see more of the internals inside the game, and it's a little convoluted how this thing is all in here. You have the monitor in there, the power brick, and just a lot of wiring. And this game uses a filter board, very much like the Tato games, and the wiring in this is overly complicated in my viewpoint. Now here we have the power brick, which is commonly not working in most of these games, unfortunately. So this has been completely rebuilt. It was missing some wiring, so I had to create a new wiring harness. Somebody had clipped out some of the wiring harness, I don't know why. Here would be the soundboard originally, which unfortunately I could not get repaired. So we've replaced the brains of the game with one of these fantastic J-Rocks. So there's an adapter that adapts the Q Bert wiring here that I think I got from Arcade Shop to JAMA, and then the J-Rock runs on JAMA. This also allows me to play other Q Bert games such as the sequels and like Q Bert's Cubes and whatnot, and the
variation version like the Mellow Yellow Q Bert game. Now, how this originally worked, this is so haphazard. These unscrew and this panel flips over and the main PCB is on the other side. And it was only hinged by this really, really crappy plastic hinge that was stapled. I took all the staples out because it was no longer adhering to this particle board. Now, I was able to get the original PCB repaired and it's working fine. There's, because the soundboard doesn't work, there's no sound. And like we discussed before, the Q Bert has a kind of a reputation for not being super reliable. It can be a little fussy. So for now, I'm going to stick with the J-Rock because I haven't really altered anything by using the J-Rock, which is important as far as restoration goes. And if I'm able to get the soundboard working, then I'll be able to sell it with the matching board sets and whatnot, and it will be all original about making collectors happy. You can see it's a little dirty in here. It's actually fairly clean, I think. So I take it back. There's a little rust. Wherever this game was, it had been sitting for a long time. Way in the back, you can see the famous knocker, the pinball knocker, for when a Q Bert jumps off, and it does function with the J-Rock board. And then there's a lot of this. This is just like this piece of paper is actually shielding to prevent interference, but it's kind of haphazard how this all fits in here. And you can see that the access panel is the only side that actually does not have wood grain, which is an interesting choice. I'm not quite sure why they did that, but there you go. Having the J-Rock in here allows you, of course, again, to play all these other different Gottlieb games. Now, some of these, because of games like Mad Planets or Kroll that require much more complicated control panels, you can't really play that on the cocktail, and it would be next to impossible without ruining the cocktail to modify the cabinet to make those. But you can play cubes and faster, harder, more challenging Q Bert, and the Mellow Yellow, it's hard to say, embraces the Mellow Yellow variant of the game as well. Just kind of add some commercials to the game. Of course, the knocker also works, so that makes it a lot easier. So there you go, a very, very rare Q Bert cocktail. Not going to see very many of these. I think I've only ever seen another one in my life once, and that was like about 15, 25 years ago. So super jazzed. Originally I bought the Q Bert J-Rock to build a scratch build Q Bert cabinet. I thought to myself in the future I would do that. But I've always really loved the cocktail version of this cabinet. I think it's one of the few cocktail cabinets that actually presents a different presentation well over the upright version, where it makes the cocktail highly desirable. Usually cocktails are pretty generic looking and not very interesting. In fact, some of them are downright pretty ugly. So I'm not going to call any specific titles out, but anyway, what a rare beast, and what a great game, what a great deal and a great find this was, especially being so underutilized and overall in pretty good shape. Definitely a survivor. I mean, you always think about these things that you wish they were always a little bit nicer, but it's a 40-year-old game, so being in this kind of shape just out in the wild, and I don't think anyone had turned this game on probably like in 20 years. It's kind of amazing, actually, that it's still in this kind of shape. So super fun to have this in the collection, even though I swore again that I wasn't going to buy any new games this year, but I didn't get very far with that promise, and I'm sure I will succumb to some other game in the future. So this brings the collection up to 31, technically. It's down here in the workshop because there's no space for it upstairs currently, of course. And now we're starting to fill up the workshop as well. So I'll have to start working on the neighbor's house or the kitchen or something. I don't know. Anyway, thanks for watching. I hope that was enjoyable for you, and I hope you're enjoying your spring, and I hope wherever it is, it's super fun and awesome. And I will see you next time. Adios.